In January of 2021, buried within thousands of pages suddenly released to the public, the Central Intelligence Agency declassified documents that had been sealed for decades. Among them were pages that looked ordinary at first glance: typed reports, mission logs, memos signed off with cold bureaucratic stamps. But hidden in those reports were stories that sounded anything but ordinary. Reports from American pilots over Vietnam in the late 1960s and early 1970s, men trained to identify enemy aircraft in split seconds, suddenly confronted with objects that did not appear on radar, that moved faster than any jet, and that behaved in ways no earthly machine ever could. One memo described a glowing sphere pacing American bombers over Hanoi. Another detailed unknown luminous phenomena that disrupted both US and Soviet radar during bombing campaigns. For decades, these accounts were buried, classified under unidentified aerial phenomena. And now, they're finally out. So what exactly did the CIA know about UFOs during the Vietnam War? And why did it take nearly 50 years for us to see these files? Tonight, we open the vault. You're watching Declassified Files, where history's buried secrets are pulled out of the shadows. Every week, we dive into documents once hidden from the public: CIA memos, KGB reports, FBI archives, stories that were never meant to be heard. If you're fascinated by espionage, conspiracies, and the mysteries governments tried to lock away, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear changes the way we look at both history and the unknown. The Vietnam War was unlike any other conflict America had fought before. By the mid-1960s, US forces were fully engaged, hundreds of thousands of troops deployed, with bombers flying daily missions against North Vietnam. The skies were thick with F-4 Phantom jets, B-52 bombers, helicopters, and reconnaissance planes. But there was another layer to this war: a shadow conflict. While American soldiers fought in the jungles, the Cold War's other giants, the Soviet Union and China, supplied North Vietnam with weapons, radar systems, and advisors. That made Vietnam not just a battlefield, but a testing ground. Every new piece of technology, Soviet SAM missiles, American electronic jammers, even radar systems, was pushed to its limits here. And for the CIA, Vietnam became a gold mine. Any anomaly in the skies was taken seriously. If a strange radar blip appeared, it might be a new Soviet jet. If a pilot reported a flash of light, it could be experimental Chinese weaponry. But here's where things get strange. Between 1966 and 1972, multiple US pilots, radar operators, and intelligence officers reported encounters with objects that didn't fit any known category. A declassified CIA summary from 1967 includes this chilling line: US pilots reported being paced by luminous aerial objects during missions over North Vietnam. Radar contact was intermittent. Objects maneuvered in ways inconsistent with conventional aircraft. For the CIA, this was a problem. Were these Soviet weapons, natural atmospheric phenomena, or something else? Remember, this was the same period when Project Blue Book, the US Air Force's official UFO investigation, was still active back home. But unlike most American UFO sightings, farmers seeing lights over cornfields, or civilians spotting saucers over small towns, these reports came from combat pilots in hostile skies, men whose lives depended on being able to instantly recognize MiGs, SAM launches, and B-52 formations, men who did not have the luxury of imagination, and yet they described objects they could not explain. One pilot logged, "Object moved at impossible speed, no heat signature, no contrail, vanished in seconds." Another radar operator in Da Nang recorded 3 unidentified returns tracked, speed estimated Mach 10, no known aircraft matches. For the CIA, every such report was both alarming and embarrassing. Admitting to their existence risked panic, or worse, admitting America didn't control its own skies. So the reports were stamped, filed, and locked away. Until now. Coming up, we'll break open the earliest reports, like the famous 1966 F-4 Phantom encounter, where American pilots swore they were outmaneuvered by a glowing sphere over Hanoi. But if that was the first, it was far from the last. The first credible reports of unidentified aerial phenomena in Vietnam surfaced in the spring of 1966. American pilots flying F-4 Phantom jets out of Udon Air Base in Thailand were on routine missions over North Vietnam. Their task was simple: intercept and disrupt enemy supply lines. But on one mission, something entirely unexpected appeared. Captain William Holt, an experienced pilot with over 200 combat hours, later wrote in his after-action log, "At approximately 0115 hours, radar detected an unknown contact moving at high speed. No identification. Visual sighting, bright, luminous sphere. Estimated altitude, 30,000 feet. Object accelerated rapidly, outpacing Phantom. No contrail, no heat signature. Object vanished within seconds." This was not an isolated case. Within weeks, similar reports began to accumulate. Pilots described balls of light pacing their bombers, disc-shaped reflections appearing in cloud cover, and impossible maneuvers that defied aerodynamic logic. One intelligence memo, declassified in 2011, reads, "Several air crews reported luminous phenomena resembling glowing orbs, often traveling parallel to aircraft. Phenomena exhibited sudden acceleration beyond Mach 5. Unconfirmed radar returns support partial sightings." The phrase "beyond Mach 5" was not casual. In the mid-1960s, the fastest operational aircraft in the world, the SR-71 Blackbird, barely exceeded Mach 3. These objects, if real, were moving at speeds technology simply did not allow at the time. For the men encountering them, the experience was unsettling. Pilots trained to react instantly to Soviet MiGs or surface-to-air missile launches suddenly found themselves staring at lights that played cat and mouse with their jets. They could neither chase nor evade. The objects simply appeared and vanished. One pilot, interviewed decades later under anonymity, described the feeling. "When you're in hostile airspace, everything you see you have to classify: friend, foe, or mistake. But these, they were none of the above. They were just there, watching us, and then gone." The CIA, receiving these reports, faced a dilemma. If these objects were advanced Soviet technology, it meant the US was dangerously outmatched. If they were atmospheric illusions, they needed to be explained to prevent panic among pilots. And if they were something else entirely, well, that possibility was left unspoken in the official memos. By 1967, the number of such incidents had grown enough that the agency opened a dedicated file. It was labeled simply, "Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Indochina." But as quickly as the reports piled up, they also began to disappear. Filed, stamped, redacted, buried. And that leads us to Chapter 2. When the CIA's declassified archives finally became available in 2021, researchers were stunned by what they found, and what they didn't. The folder labeled Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Indochina, contained dozens of reports, but many were incomplete. Entire paragraphs had been blacked out. Names of witnesses were erased. Diagrams of radar tracks were replaced with thick black lines. On one memo, The phrase, "object maneuvered with apparent intelligence," was followed by 2 entire pages of redacted text. Another document included a hand-drawn sketch of a glowing orb near a B-52 formation, but the technical analysis section was completely removed. This pattern was consistent. The most sensational parts of the files were missing. Why? Some historians argue that the CIA's concern was never extraterrestrial. It was Soviet. The agency feared these sightings were evidence of experimental Soviet aircraft, possibly hypersonic missiles or energy weapons being tested in combat zones. Others suggest the redactions were to protect classified U.S. radar capabilities. If American pilots or radar operators admitted what they saw, it might reveal too much about how U.S. systems worked. But then there's the third possibility. Several researchers point out that the redactions often occur not where technical data should be, but where the narrative becomes most mysterious. Where pilots describe being paced, communications interference, or light phenomena showing awareness of formation changes. In other words, the parts suggesting intelligence behind the objects. One of the most striking documents comes from December 1967. A reconnaissance pilot flying over the Ho Chi Minh Trail reported being illuminated by a luminous object for several minutes. His instruments temporarily failed. The declassified report cuts off abruptly after the phrase, "Object remained stationary above aircraft before executing sudden vertical climb at extreme velocity." Everything after that sentence is gone. When asked why so much of the file was redacted, a CIA spokesperson in 2021 gave the standard line: "Sensitive information has been removed for reasons of national security." National security, the catch-all phrase that ironically makes the mystery even deeper. Because if these were just illusions or weather phenomena, why would they remain classified for over half a century? The truth is this: between 1966 and 1969, American pilots reported dozens of encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena over Vietnam. Some were logged, some were buried, and some never reached paper at all. But the sightings didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. By the early 1970s, during the heaviest bombing campaigns over Hanoi, reports of strange aerial craft reached their peak. And one particular incident, filed in 1972, still shakes researchers today. A sighting where both American and Soviet radar confirmed the same object. A sighting where a UFO appeared to interfere with active missile launches. That is where our story turns from mysterious to terrifying. While American intelligence tried to make sense of the glowing objects reported over Vietnam, another set of eyes was watching the skies: the Soviet Union and their North Vietnamese allies. Declassified Soviet military correspondence released after the collapse of the USSR in the 1990s, revealed that Soviet advisors stationed in Hanoi were filing their own reports. These weren't the kind of stories found in American UFO books. These were military logs, stamped with official seals, written in the precise language of officers trained never to exaggerate. One translated Soviet memo from 1968 states, "During air defense operations over Hanoi, radar station P-35 detected unidentified object. Object appeared at altitude of 20 kilometers, speed estimated above 5,000 kilometers per hour. No transponder, no known aircraft in theater matches description. Object departed vertically. Observation confirmed by 2 separate radar sites." For Soviet radar crews, distinguishing between American B-52 bombers and high-altitude reconnaissance planes was already difficult. But this was different. The speed was beyond anything they knew. Even the American SR-71 Blackbird, which the Soviets respected and feared, could not climb vertically at such acceleration. North Vietnamese eyewitnesses also described strange lights. Villagers along the Red River reported bright stars that moved against the wind and orbs that hovered silently above treetops before vanishing. To peasants, these were omens. To Soviet technicians, they were anomalies, and anomalies demanded explanation. The Soviet hypothesis. Soviet advisors offered several theories. The first was experimental American aircraft. Some speculated that the US was testing hypersonic drones in combat zones, machines beyond the MiG-21's ability to intercept. If true, it would mean America was hiding technology decades ahead of its time. The second theory was atmospheric. Plasma formations created by high-altitude lightning could appear luminous, darting unpredictably. This aligned with known phenomena like ball lightning, yet radar confirmation complicated this idea. Ball lightning doesn't usually appear on radar, nor does it pace aircraft formations. The third theory was whispered only in private, that these were not American, not Soviet, not Chinese, something else. A declassified Soviet field note from 1969 puts it bluntly. Unidentified aerial object exhibited behavior suggesting control. Object avoided missile lock. Object positioned itself between bomber formation and interceptor aircraft. No known technology explains maneuver. This last detail alarmed both Soviets and Americans alike. Because if these objects demonstrated avoidance or positioning, it implied intelligence, awareness, intent. CIA's dilemma. From CIA intercepts of Soviet communications, it became clear by 1970 that both sides were encountering the same phenomenon. American pilots thought they were chasing Soviet craft. Soviet radar crews thought they were tracking American prototypes. Neither side could prove otherwise. For the CIA, this created both opportunity and danger. Opportunity. If the Soviets were as confused as the Americans, then maybe these objects weren't a national security threat, at least not one caused by human enemies. Danger. If neither side controlled them, then who or what did? A declassified CIA analysis from 1971 summarized the problem. Reports of unidentified aerial phenomena are consistent across both US and Soviet sources in Indochina. Observations include luminous objects, extreme acceleration, and apparent tactical awareness. Explanations remain inconclusive. It's rare for CIA language to read so uncertainly. Usually their assessments are firm, even if wrong. Here, the words inconclusive and apparent tactical awareness suggest analysts didn't know what they were looking at. And then came 1972, the year when the sightings reached their peak. During the heaviest bombing raids on Hanoi, when radar screens on both sides lit up with something that neither Soviet nor American systems could deny. But before that, one more layer of reports deserves attention. Whispers from the jungle. While radar operators scanned the skies, soldiers on the ground had their own stories. American infantry and I Corps reported strange lights drifting silently over tree lines. Sometimes they assumed it was flares dropped by aircraft, but flares burn out. These lights didn't. One Marine wrote in his diary in 1969, "Bright orb moved across ridge, silent, thought it was a chopper, no rotor sound, disappeared straight up. Men spooked." North Vietnamese troops told similar tales, though theirs rarely made it into official documents. In captured NVA diaries, American translators found notes about strange stars that watched from above during firefights. Superstition spread quickly. Some soldiers believed the lights were spirits of the dead. Others thought they were foreign machines recording their movements. The jungle was already a place of paranoia. Every shadow could hide an ambush. Every noise could mean death. Add in inexplicable lights in the sky, and fear became something deeper, existential. The CIA, when collecting prisoner interrogations, noted that some North Vietnamese fighters believed America had sky machines that the Soviets cannot match. Ironically, American pilots thought the opposite, that the Soviets had sent something America could not match. This mutual confusion only thickened the mystery. Foreshadow of 1972. By late 1971, both the CIA and the Soviet KGB were fully aware that reports of unidentified aerial phenomena were not going away. Pilots kept seeing them, radar kept tracking them, ground troops kept whispering about them, yet no one could explain them. And then came December 1972, during the Operation Linebacker 2, the infamous Christmas bombing of Hanoi, when both American and Soviet radar would lock on to something that defied all categories. An event where multiple pilots, radar crews, and ground witnesses described the same object. An event where an unidentified craft appeared to interfere with missile systems. An event so startling that even in declassified CIA files today, the details remain half buried. But that is Chapter 4, December 1972. Hanoi burned under the roar of American bombers. Operation Linebacker 2 had begun, the most intense aerial bombardment of the war. Each night, waves of B-52 Stratofortresses lifted off from Guam and Thailand, their bays packed with bombs. Escort fighters swept ahead, while electronic jamming aircraft tried to blind North Vietnamese radar. It was supposed to be shock and awe, but what unfolded in the skies over Hanoi that winter would remain one of the strangest mysteries of the Cold War. Radar anomalies. On the night of December 18th, U.S. radar controllers began to notice something unusual. As formations of B-52s crossed into North Vietnamese airspace, phantom blips appeared on the screens. At first, controllers thought it was enemy jamming, but the patterns didn't match. These weren't random bursts of noise. The blips moved in coordinated ways, sometimes pacing the bombers, sometimes circling them. Meanwhile, Soviet radar advisors working with the North Vietnamese saw the same anomalies. One declassified Soviet memo, translated years later, describes it bluntly. During missile guidance operations, unknown target appeared. Target maintained speed consistent with B-52 formation, altitude 10 kilometers. Target not identified as hostile or friendly. Attempts to lock, missiles unsuccessful. In other words, the North Vietnamese tried to fire at it, but the missiles refused to lock. Pilot encounters. The first American pilot to break radio silence that night was flying an F-4 Phantom. His words, preserved in a partially declassified transcript, were terse. "Control, I have visual. Bright object, no strobes, no nav lights. It's moving with us." Seconds later, another pilot confirmed. "I see it too. White sphere, maybe 200 feet across. No sound. It's above the lead bomber." For men trained to spot every detail of enemy aircraft, the shape of a MiG, the glow of afterburners, this was something outside their manuals. Some tried to pursue. When an F-4 accelerated toward the object, it simply darted ahead, covering miles in seconds. Then it stopped, dead still, hovering above the bomber stream. One gunner on a B-52 later described the moment in an oral history. "We thought it was some new Soviet weapon, but it wasn't firing at us. It just sat there, watching, and then it moved faster than anything I'd ever seen in my life." Missile malfunctions. Down below, Soviet-made SA-2 guideline missile batteries attempted to lock on to the intruder. Technicians adjusted frequencies, switched modes, tried everything. Each attempt failed. Curiously, the missiles had no problem locking on to the American bombers, but when aimed at the glowing sphere, the systems broke down. A CIA analysis written in early 1973 summarized the accounts. Multiple reports of anomalous target during December raids. Object tracked simultaneously by US and Soviet radar. Missile lock attempts failed. Object exhibited acceleration beyond known capabilities. Conclusion: phenomenon remains unexplained. For the CIA to admit unexplained was extraordinary. In most cases, they preferred terms like atmospheric, optical, or electronic interference. Here, the language was blunt. No explanation. Ex-witness testimonies. Perhaps the most chilling accounts come from men who were there. One U.S. pilot speaking decades later recalled, "We were in formation, and suddenly this light, bright, white, but not blinding, appeared above us. It wasn't on any friendly frequency. It wasn't a flare. It moved like it knew where we were going. When SAMs came up, it was like the missiles ignored it. Some of us joked it was protecting us. Others thought it was hurting us." A Soviet advisor told a different story. "We watched radar tracks. The object interfered with our guidance. We could not strike it, but it was no American plane. We knew every American system. This was not one of them." For both sides, the object was a phantom neither could explain, yet both acknowledged. The vertical climb. The climax of the December encounter came when multiple witnesses reported the object performing an impossible maneuver. At approximately 2:40 local time, the glowing sphere reportedly shot vertically into the sky. Radar operators on both sides watched their screens as the blip ascended faster than any missile. One U.S. intelligence officer scribbled a note in the margin of his report. "Acceleration suggests Mach 15 plus. Impossible." After that, the object vanished. No wreckage, no signal, just gone. The Hanoi Incident of December 1972 should have sparked an international investigation. Multiple pilots saw it. Soviet radar tracked it. Missiles failed against it. By any measure, this was a world-changing event. But instead of open inquiry, there was silence. The official reports. In January 1973, a CIA summary crossed the desks of senior analysts. It referenced the December sightings in the most careful language possible. Unidentified aerial phenomena reported over Hanoi during Linebacker 2 operations. Multiple sources confirm luminous object of unknown origin. Radar correlation observed. No hostile action noted. Case closed. 3 words stood out. Case closed. The phrasing was deliberate. In intelligence circles, closing a case doesn't mean it's explained. It means it's shelved, put away where no one will look again. For the pilots who had seen the glowing sphere, the message was clear: do not speak. For the Soviet advisors, the conclusion was similar. This was not to be discussed beyond secure channels. The redactions began. By 1973, as America prepared to withdraw from Vietnam, many of the incident files were already being redacted. Analysts used thick black ink to strike out technical details, names, even times of day. One file, declassified decades later, shows entire pages removed, with only the header remaining. Subject: anomalous radar contact, Hanoi region. Below the title, nothing but black. Why redact so heavily if the phenomenon was harmless? Why censor reports if it was just ball lightning or radar clutter? The only logical answer: there was more in those pages than the public was meant to see. The pilot's silence. When American airmen returned home, many carried unspoken memories. Some tried to talk, only to be silenced. One former B-52 crewman recalled, "After we landed, we were debriefed like normal. But when I mentioned the light, the intel officer cut me off. He told me to stick to mission details, altitude, speed, bomb release. Nothing about unidentified lights. He said if I wanted to keep flying, I'd keep my mouth shut." Others were more blunt. A phantom pilot said in a later interview, "We were told, point blank, that mentioning UFOs in official reports was career suicide. You'd be grounded, end of story." The stigma was real. Even during wartime, even after witnessing something extraordinary, pilots learned quickly that silence was safer than honesty. The Soviet response. On the Soviet side, things were no different. KGB files from the early 1970s, declassified after the Cold War, show that UFO encounters in Vietnam were filed under anomalous phenomena and buried. A 1974 directive to Soviet advisors in Hanoi stated, "Reports of luminous aerial objects are to be logged as atmospheric anomalies. Do not speculate further. Maintain discipline in language." The phrase, "maintain discipline in language," was a coded way of saying, do not call it what it might be. Do not use the word UFO. For both superpowers, the risk was too high. Admitting the phenomenon meant admitting vulnerability, and in the Cold War, admitting vulnerability was unthinkable. CIA's quiet reclassification. In 1975, as the Vietnam War drew to a close, the CIA performed what internal memos call a reclassification review. Files on the Hanoi Incident, along with dozens of other Vietnam-era UFO encounters, were quietly shifted to higher clearance levels. Access was limited to a handful of analysts. One surviving note from a CIA archivist in 1975 reads, "Due to sensitive nature of aerial phenomena incidents, files moved to compartmentalized section. Access restricted to senior review only." Translated, lock it deeper. Let fewer eyes see it. Why the silence? The question remains, why bury it? There are three possible reasons. Fear of panic. If word leaked that unidentified craft were pacing bombers and deflecting missiles, the public might panic. Congress might demand answers the CIA couldn't give. Strategic advantage. If the phenomenon was real but unexplained, it was better to let the enemy wonder. Let the Soviets think America controlled it. Let America think the Soviets did. Confusion could be useful. The unknown. The most unsettling reason of all. Maybe the CIA had no explanation. Maybe they chose silence because ignorance in the world of intelligence is weakness. Better to say nothing than admit the truth. The veterans' memories. Years later, when documents began trickling out, some veterans finally spoke. One radar operator summed it up simply, "We weren't crazy. We saw it. The Russians saw it. The CIA saw it. They just didn't want anyone else to see it." Another B-52 crewman said, "People think UFO sightings are farmers in fields. But I was in the most dangerous sky on Earth, watching missiles explode around me, and there was something else up there. Something we couldn't touch. That memory never left me." The last declassified note. Among the files released in 2021, one line stands out. It comes from a heavily redacted CIA document dated January 1973, weeks after the Hanoi Incident. The surviving sentence reads, "The phenomenon displayed characteristics of intelligence, but origin remains undetermined." It's the closest thing to an admission in the entire Vietnam archive. Intelligence. Not just light, not just weather, something acting with purpose. And then, nothing more. The file ends. The curtain falls. By 1975, the war ended. Saigon fell. The world moved on. The UFO files of Vietnam were boxed, sealed, and forgotten. Pilots retired. Advisors died. Documents gathered dust in vaults. For decades, the story of luminous objects over Hanoi remained hidden until the digital age cracked open the vaults. Until researchers, combing through thousands of CIA files, rediscovered the fragments that told a story too strange to ignore. Foreshadow to Chapter 6. In our next chapter, we explored the theories. Was it Soviet technology, secret American weapons, atmospheric illusions, or something not of this earth? The CIA had their guesses, scientists had theirs, but none of them fully explained what happened in those skies. And that is where the mystery deepened when the declassified files finally emerged decades later. Analysts, historians, and UFO researchers all asked the same question: what exactly happened in those skies over Vietnam? The reports were consistent: glowing spheres, incredible speeds, vertical climbs, radar confirmation, failed missile locks. But consistency is not explanation. So over the years, 4 main theories have emerged, each one compelling, each one flawed. Theory 1. Soviet superweapons. The first theory was the most obvious at the time, that the objects were Soviet technology. During the Vietnam War, the Soviet Union poured resources into supporting North Vietnam. Advisors, radar systems, MiG fighter jets, surface-to-air missiles. Why not experimental aircraft? Some American analysts speculated that Moscow was testing prototypes, perhaps hypersonic drones or directed energy platforms under real combat conditions. One CIA memo from 1973 suggested possibility exists of Soviet deployment of experimental high-speed aerial systems in Indochina theater. Further assessment required. It was a logical theory, but it had problems. First, no evidence of such technology ever surfaced in Soviet archives after the Cold War. Even the most advanced Soviet aircraft of the era, the MiG-25 Foxbat, could not perform the vertical climbs described by pilots. Second, if the Soviets had possessed such weapons, why not use them elsewhere? Why not deploy them in Europe, where the Cold War balance was most fragile? Why only in Vietnam? By the 1990s, most historians quietly dismissed the Soviet explanation. Theory 2. American black projects. The second theory turned the suspicion inward. Perhaps the UFOs weren't Soviet at all. Perhaps they were American. Could the CIA or US Air Force have been secretly deploying advanced prototypes in Vietnam without even telling their own pilots? America certainly had secret programs in the 1960s. The SR-71 Blackbird and A-12 Oxcart spy planes were developed under extreme secrecy. Pilots flying combat missions were often unaware of projects happening just a few hangars away. Could the glowing spheres have been some form of advanced drone designed to confuse enemy radar or protect bombers? Declassified Air Force test logs mention experimental decoys and electronic countermeasures, but nothing approaching the speeds or maneuvers reported over Hanoi. And again, the same question arises. If America had such miraculous technology, why wasn't it used to win the war? Why weren't these craft deployed against Soviet interceptors in Europe, or to defend American bombers more reliably? Instead, the US lost thousands of aircraft in Vietnam. If secret UFO-like drones existed, they failed to change the outcome. Theory 3. Atmospheric and natural phenomena. The third theory is the skeptic's favorite, natural phenomena. Vietnam skies were chaotic. Monsoon storms, high-altitude lightning, strange weather patterns. Plasma formations, sometimes called ball lightning, can appear as glowing orbs, darting unpredictably across the sky. Some scientists suggest the stress of combat amplified pilots' perceptions. In the heat of battle, a flash of lightning could become a glowing craft. A radar glitch could become a pacing sphere. This theory has merit, but it also has limits. Ball lightning doesn't usually pace aircraft for minutes at a time. It doesn't trigger multiple radar systems simultaneously on both US and Soviet screens, and it doesn't climb vertically at thousands of miles per hour. Atmospheric explanations can account for some reports, but not all. Theory 4. The unknown. The final theory is the most controversial and the one people whisper about, that the UFOs were exactly what the name implies, unidentified and not of this earth. This idea gained traction in the 2000s when declassified files showed consistent patterns: intelligence, avoidance of missile locks, behavior suggesting awareness. One CIA analyst wrote in 1973, "Phenomenon displayed apparent tactical awareness, origin undetermined." Tactical awareness. That's not weather. That's not radar clutter. That's behavior. Researchers point out that Vietnam was not the only war zone with UFO sightings. During World War II, Allied pilots reported Foo Fighters, glowing orbs that followed bombers over Europe. During the Korean War, similar reports surfaced. And in the Gulf War of 1991, US soldiers reported strange lights over the desert. The pattern is eerie. Wherever war rages, unidentified objects appear. Are they observers? Protectors? Something else? No one knows. But the Vietnam files add weight to the mystery, because here, unlike most civilian UFO reports, the witnesses were trained pilots, radar operators, and intelligence officers, men whose job was to identify aerial threats instantly. And still, they could not explain what they saw. The CIA's unspoken conclusion. Though the CIA never admitted to believing in extraterrestrial origins, their silence speaks volumes. Why redact pages? Why classify reports for 50 years? Why admit apparent intelligence and then close the case? Some researchers believe the agency recognized the phenomenon as real, but beyond their control. And in the world of intelligence, admitting powerlessness is unacceptable. Better to bury it than to confront it. One historian put it this way: when the CIA says nothing, that's when you should listen most closely. Silence is not ignorance. Silence is strategy. The modern reassessment. Today, in the 2020s, the US government has rebranded UFOs as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. Pentagon reports now openly discuss objects with advanced capabilities seen by Navy pilots over the Pacific. In a strange way, the Vietnam files were ahead of their time. They described the same patterns: glowing spheres, impossible speeds, tactical awareness that Navy pilots reported over the Pacific in 2004. The difference, in Vietnam, the reports were buried. In today's world, they're cautiously acknowledged. The mystery that remains. So which theory is correct? Soviet superweapons? No evidence. American black projects? Possible, but unlikely. Natural phenomena? Explain some, not all. Extraterrestrial? Unproven, but the only explanation that fits every detail. The truth may lie somewhere between. Perhaps plasma phenomena interacted with radar in ways not yet understood. Perhaps experimental drones flew occasionally, creating confusion. Perhaps some encounters were misidentifications, others were genuine mysteries. But one fact remains. The Hanoi Incident of 1972 is still unexplained. And in the language of intelligence agencies, unexplained means unsolved. Foreshadow to Chapter 7. The theories explain little, but the human impact tells another story. For the men who saw those objects, the memories lingered. Some described awe, others described terror. In our next chapter, we step away from analysis and into emotion. How did it feel to be there, to watch the impossible unfold in hostile skies? How do veterans live with memories of something the world still denies? That is Chapter 7. For decades, the files remained locked away, but the men who lived those nights carried the memories with them. And memory is not so easily redacted. The pilot's voice. Captain William Holt, the F-4 pilot who first reported a glowing sphere in 1966, rarely spoke of it in public, but in a private interview years later, his words were measured, haunted. You spend your whole career training to identify threats. A MiG-21 at 3 miles, a SAM launch, a tracer line from a gun emplacement. Everything has a shape, a speed, a logic. But that night, over Hanoi, nothing made sense. We chased something we couldn't catch, and for a few seconds, I realized we weren't the hunters. We were the hunted. His eyes, according to the interviewer, welled with tears. He was a soldier, not a dreamer. Yet the memory still unsettled him, decades later. The B-52 gunner. A gunner aboard a Stratofortress recalled December 1972 as if it had happened yesterday. We were already scared. The SAMs lit the sky every night. You could feel the bomber shake when flak hit close. But then there was this light, white, bright, not a flare, not a jet, just there, above us, watching. When the missiles came, they ignored it. They went for us. The light didn't flinch. For a crazy second, I thought maybe it was protecting us. Then it shot straight up and disappeared. Do you know what that does to a man? To see something like that and be told to never speak of it. I still dream about it. Sometimes it feels more real than the war itself. The radar operator. At Da Nang Air Base, a radar technician named James Callahan logged dozens of strange returns. He spoke once, late in life, at a veterans gathering. People think UFOs are lights in the sky. For us, they were blips on a screen. Blips that moved like nothing else. Sometimes they danced, sometimes they just hovered. But they were there. I know because I tracked them with my own hands. And every time I logged it, the report came back classified. Case closed. Not for me. Those screens are burned into my eyes. I'll never forget the way the blip would dart, stop, and vanish. Machines don't do that. But it did. The Soviet advisor. From the Soviet side, fragments of testimony survive. One advisor stationed near Hanoi in 1972 told a Russian journalist in the 1990s, "We thought it was American technology, some secret weapon. But after what I saw, I no longer believed that. We had radar, we had missiles, we could hit B-52s at 30,000 feet. But this we could not touch." It was humiliating, honestly, to watch something move across the screen, to launch a missile, and to see the missile chase nothing. We were soldiers, but in that moment, we were children staring at the stars. The North Vietnamese soldier. Captured diaries from North Vietnamese troops reveal another layer, the folklore of war. One entry, translated by American intelligence, reads, "The sky showed a star that moved against the wind. Some men said it was the spirit of our ancestors watching the battle. Others said it was an American ghost machine. We were afraid, but we also felt it was not here to kill us. It was only here to see." To men hardened by jungle warfare, who feared bombs and bullets daily, the glowing orbs were not weapons. They were omens, and perhaps that made them more terrifying. The weight of silence. For all these voices, the hardest part was not the sighting itself. It was the silence afterwards. American pilots were told to forget. Soviet advisors were ordered not to speculate. Vietnamese soldiers were warned not to spread superstition. But memory resists orders, and silence breeds isolation. One U.S. veteran put it this way, "You can laugh about enemy fire. You can cry about buddies lost. But you can't talk about the thing you saw in the sky, because no one believes you. That kind of silence eats at you." The emotional collapse. As the years passed, some veterans confessed the UFO memories haunted them more than the war itself. The war had explanations, politics, ideology, mistakes. The UFOs had none. They were the unsolved piece of a puzzle that defined their youth. One man, a phantom pilot, said near the end of his life, "People ask me what scared me the most. Was it the SAMs? The MEGs? The jungle? No. It was that night when something looked back at me from the dark. I can't explain it. And that's what frightens me most. That after everything, I still don't know." Why it matters. The emotional weight of these testimonies reveals something often overlooked. UFO reports are not just about objects. They are about people. Men at war, staring death in the face, suddenly confronted by something beyond death, beyond war, beyond explanation. It left scars. Scars not written in medical reports, not treated in hospitals, but carved deep in memory. For the CIA, these were just incidents. For the veterans, they were life-changing. The story of UFOs over Vietnam does not end with the files. It does not end with the Hanoi Incident of 1972, or with the closing of the war in 1975. Because what lingers is not just the documents, it's the questions. The puzzle left behind. 50 years later, the puzzle remains unsolved. Multiple pilots confirmed luminous objects that outmaneuvered their jets. Radar operators on both sides confirmed blips that defied physics. Missiles failed to lock on to targets that seemed aware, intelligent, and yet the official verdict was silence. Case closed. File redacted. Memory ignored. The puzzle lies not only in what was seen, but in why it was hidden. Why would both the United States and the Soviet Union, bitter enemies in every other domain, react the same way to these encounters? Why would both choose silence over truth? Patterns across wars. When historians compare the Vietnam files with other wartime UFO reports, a pattern emerges. World War II, pilots reported Foo Fighters, glowing orbs pacing bombers over Europe. Korea, 1950s, U.S. soldiers saw lights maneuvering over battlefields. Vietnam, 1960s, 70s, glowing spheres above Hanoi, confirmed on radar. Gulf War, 1991, mysterious lights tracked over Iraqi skies. Different wars, different decades, same phenomena. Wherever humanity wages war, unidentified aerial objects appear. Is it coincidence or something deeper? The Watchers. Some researchers propose a provocative idea that the UFOs appear not at random, but at moments of human crisis, that they are observers, watchers, perhaps even referees. The CIA would never put such speculation in print, but the language of the files, apparent tactical awareness, unknown origin, intelligence suggested, hints at something more than physics. A chilling thought arises. What if during our most violent moments, someone or something watches us? Not to intervene fully, not to stop the war, but to be present, to record, to witness, and perhaps to remind us we are not alone. The cost of silence. The silence imposed on pilots and soldiers had consequences. Men carried their memories in private, unable to reconcile what they saw with what they were told. The CIA closed the case. The Soviets closed the case, but the witnesses never closed theirs. The cost of silence is doubt. The cost of doubt is fear. And the cost of fear is the knowledge that perhaps we are not in control of our own skies. Why now? So why are these files surfacing now after half a century? Partly it's law. Declassification schedules eventually force old files into the light. But partly it may be strategy. In the 2020s, the Pentagon has admitted that UFOs, or UAPs as they are now called, are real, unexplained, and observed by modern pilots. By releasing Vietnam-era files, intelligence agencies may be preparing the public, showing that these phenomena are not new. They have been with us for decades, maybe longer. The cliffhanger. And that leads us to the most haunting question of all. If unidentified aerial phenomena were present over Hanoi in 1972, if they were present over Europe in 1944, over Korea in 1951, over Iraq in 1991. Where are they now? Are they still above us, unseen, still tracking our wars, our crises, our fragile steps into space? Are they watching right now? And if they are, what will happen the day they decide to do more than watch? The files are open. The words are there. The witnesses have spoken. But the truth is not in the documents. It's in the silence between the lines. The CIA called it unidentified. The Soviets called it anomalous. The pilots called it unforgettable. And we are left to call it what it truly is, a mystery that refuses to die. This was Declassified Files, the past uncovered, the future exposed.